Hello, BookTube. I've got a little bit of mail for you today on this gray, overcast day. We'll start off with periodicals, including a wonderful periodical, the Bedford Times Press from Bedford, Iowa. A tiny little thing with local coverage, except for the very first thing you see when you open the page. The way the human eye works is that when you open a two-page spread, you go right away to the upper corner of the opposite page, and as well you should, because that's my column for this week. It looks like in this week's issue I was writing about some notable February releases, and that's the only place you're going to see it is in the Bedford Times Press. So the link is down below. If you feel like getting a weekly book column, feel free to subscribe. And if that's the only reason you're subscribing, and if you don't live in Taylor County, I don't see why that would be the only reason you're subscribing, feel free to drop a note to the editor of the Bedford Times Press letting her know that that's the reason you're subscribing. That always helps a workaday hack. We also have the TLS, the Times Literary Supplement, which has the greatest literary journal in the English-speaking world. This particular issue was mostly political driven, and so was of less interest to me. But the letters page can always be counted on to be of interest. And there was a letter here that I want to go through with you because of the roller coaster ride it put me through emotionally. It's about Thomas Mann. The writer writes from Berkeley, California, and starts to make excellent points. I was cheering when the letter begins. Michael Lipkin's review of 2 books on Thomas Mann needs serious correction. This is a case where, when someone writes in about something and says this needs correcting, usually what they mean is the review didn't align with my own personal opinions. That doesn't need correction. That's just a difference of opinion. But every once in a while, as you're going to see, the writer writes in with some fairly bare-knuckled factual corrections that should not have slipped by the editor of the piece. Mann was born in 1875. When his father died in 1891, he was 16, not 11. It is not true to say that his older brother and more experienced brother Heinrich offered the young Thomas little encouragement in his early years. When they lived together in Rome and Palestine from 1896 to 1898, and Thomas was writing Buddenbrooks, which was published in 1901, not in 1905, Heinrich gave him frequent advice and encouragement. Lipkin describes Thomas as spending years in California, of all places. But when he lived in Los Angeles from 1940 to 1952, his fellow exiles and neighbors included, and then the author of the piece, I'm cheering the whole time, so I'm thinking, okay, these factual points got by you. They got by the editor of the piece. So you got verifiable dates wrong, which is horrible. And the writer of the piece, who was it again? Michael Lipkin, had best stay silent on that subject. He is just factually wrong on the dates. And the implication, California of all places, as if Thomas Mann were sunbathing the whole time, is belied by the list that the author of the letter gives, where the circles that he moved in were full of exiles and expatriates from Germany, from Nazi oppression. And I was cheering as he goes through the list, just a huge list of writers and screenwriters and directors and whatnot. But then he finishes up the list by writing "and so on" in German. And then he lost me because he's a pretentious ponce, and who cares if he's right? So the reason I mention that is not only so that you have a quick and easy lesson on how to stay on the north wind side of Steve's hatred for pretension, but also because we'll lay the marker down and see if the writer of the review writes back. He shouldn't. He was just simply caught out in errors. But then there's also the New Yorker, which is an interesting dialogue also going on the letters page, because there was a recent article about distraction-free writing devices and what you can do, apps that you can set to stop yourself from looking at line and whatnot. And there were a couple of diametrically opposed letters about that subject, or about something tangential to that subject, which is typewriting. The first letter is from Lexington, Kentucky. Beautiful Lexington, Kentucky. Lucas offhandedly remarks that the writer and agrarian Wendell Berry, quote, boasted in Harper's that he didn't need a computer because he had a wife. In his essay, Berry does not boast that he doesn't need a computer. Rather, he declares that he will not buy one. He eschews computers, not because he has a wife, but because he dislikes his dependence on energy companies, which produce electric power deprived mainly here in Kentucky, as elsewhere, from strip-mined coal. and which supplant technologies that are economical and conducive to community relations with ones that are less so. Barry mentions his wife because she types out all his handwritten drafts, a detail that some readers have seized upon as retrograde. But anyone, including a writer, might type out drafts for love or money. Lucas deems writing by hand, quote, a luxury I couldn't afford. Yet his article downplays the costs of technological luxuries he enjoys. No matter how one feels about Barry's approach to computers, he ought to be respected for thinking critically about their origins and their effects on our surroundings. And with all due respect to the author from beautiful Lexington, Kentucky, they're dead wrong. Wendell Berry in that. If you read the essay in question, and especially comments of his elsewhere that informed and grounded that essay, that gave birth to it, you know that he did disdain computers. In addition to not liking them because they further the money-grubbing aspects of coal mining, he also disliked them. And more importantly, the crack about how I don't need a computer because I have a wife was meant exactly as it sounds. That was exactly the way the author meant it. None of the letter writer goes on. Anyone, including a writer, might type out drafts for love or money, but we're not talking about the writer typing out drafts for love or money. We're talking about the wife doing it. Wendell Berry meant that comment in the way that many writers at the time when he was making that comment made similar comments and meant it, which is, I don't need a new machine to do my bidding because I have an old machine to do my bidding. So, I admit I'm not Wendell Berry's biggest fan as a writer, but even so, it appears to be irresistible these days for everyone to crawl out on a perch and lecture other adults on moralistic grounds, make them feel terrible, make them slink off in disgrace. But nevertheless, the original quotes were more correctly in context than this kind of ego-bothering nonsense applied to Wendell Berry of all people. But anyway, we have packages as well. It won't all just be rants about letters to the editor. I haven't fired off a good letter to the editor myself in a while. I really ought to do that. There's nothing quite like it than firing off a letter to the editor. It almost feels embarrassing if they decide to run it. That almost feels embarrassing. And the reason why I don't is the reason I mentioned yesterday. I used to read my periodicals as a ritual every week. So the TLS, the New Yorker, I wouldn't be reading them the day they got to me. I would let them sit. Or actually, it was a Friday that I usually did it. So I would let them sit all week long until Friday. And then on Friday, I would put my sweet old dogs to bed and tell them I'll be back in a little while. And I would go out, I would do a few errands, and I would go to a hole-in-the-wall Chinese food place and read and annotate my periodicals. And that is always when I generated my letters to the editor. Because then you're reading in detail, then you're really bearing down on the piece. You're not just flying through it. I might have caught a couple of those, at least one of those wrong dates on the Thomas Mann letter myself. I wouldn't have lectured. I certainly wouldn't have added idioms in English and switched them into German just to nail home the point that I know more than you do. I wouldn't have done that, but I would have added a joke. but I don't do it anymore. I don't do that ritual anymore. So I haven't fired off a letter to the editor. I don't think I did it at all in 2021. It used to be, as George Costanza would say, a bodily function. Well, I haven't done it in a long time. I really should do that. But anyway, what have we got here? Okay. Okay. All right, this January, February, March. This comes out in late March. This is by Lee Kravitz, and it's called The Last Confessions of Sylvia P. And I was thrown for a minute there because it has a little circle on the front. I was thinking, oh, is it already won some sort of Indie Award or Kirkus Advance Award or whatever? But no, this says Indie Next Deadline, January 6th. Library Reads Deadline, February 1st. I don't know what either one of those mean, but can you imagine? Can you imagine being lectured on the cover of a book, printed indelibly there? That's not a sticker. You can't take that off. I don't know what that is. I don't know what are those things. Do either one of you know? Indie Next or Library Reads Deadline? Why there would be a deadline? I don't know, one way or another. But let's see what this is. Blending past and present and told through three unique interwoven narratives that build on one another, a daring and brilliant debut novel that reimagines a chapter in the life of Sylvia Plath, telling the story behind the creation of her classic semi-autobiographical novel, The Bell Jar. Okay, so it's three narratives. This is the debut. That's wonderful for Lee Kravitz. We'll find out about Lee Kravitz. We'll learn about who Lee Kravitz is. And this has a blurb by Adam Johnson, the author of The Orphan Master's Wife. fantastic. That's a coup. Let's see who Lee Kravitz is. Lee Kravitz teaches fiction and nonfiction at the San Francisco Writers Grotto, has lectured at Stanford University's Wallace Stegner Fellowship Program and UC Berkeley's Creative Writing Program, and is co-founder of the Lit Camp Writers Conference with collaborators Jonathan Latham, Adam Johnson. Oh, he's a colleague. Andrew Sean Greer and Janice Cook Newman. The author of 2 nonfiction books, Super Survivors and Strange Contagion. Kravitz has written for the New York Times, New York Magazine, and The Atlantic, and for PBS, including Frontline and Sesame Street. He lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and children. Okay, but this is his debut novel, so he's written a lot of stuff. This is just the first novel that he's written. And I feel all primed to do it. I know there are those of you out there who are much bigger Sylvia Plath fans than I am, but I feel all primed to read the book because I read that massive biography, Red Comet, and loved it. Absolutely. I lived with that book for a while. So I feel like I'm all ready to read a book about. Then we have one other package here. It's in a manila envelope, but it's quite heavy. It could be a finished copy. No? All right. Well, it is definitely a finished copy. What do we got here? Oh no! God help us! What a face! What a face for a Friday. Okay, this is a big new biography that's coming out. I don't have a date on it. I'm assuming it's February. There's no sheet in here. This is by Walter Starr, and it is Salmon P. Chase, Lincoln's vital rival. Slightly colorized. It's not a winning cover, but that's okay. You probably couldn't have a winning cover with a puss like that. I don't have a sheet on this, but let's find out about this. Salmon Chase is best remembered as a rival for Lincoln for the Republican nomination of 1860, but there would not have been a national Republican Party, and Lincoln could not have won the presidency were it not for the vital groundwork Chase had laid over the previous 2 decades. Starting in the early 1840s, long before Lincoln was speaking out against slavery, Chase was founding and leading anti-slavery parties. He represented fugitive slaves so often in his law practice that he was known as the Attorney General for runaway Negroes, and he furthered his radical reputation as an outspoken U.S. Senator and progressive governor of Ohio. Tapped by Lincoln to be Secretary of the Treasury, Chase would soon prove vital to the Civil War effort, brilliantly raising the billions of dollars that allowed the Union to win the war, while also pressing the president to emancipate the country's slaves and recognize black rights. When Lincoln had the chance to appoint a Chief Justice in 1864, he chose his faithful rival because he was sure Chase would make the right decisions on the difficult racial, political, and economic issues that the Supreme Court would confront during Reconstruction. Rigorously researched and elegantly argued, this book offers a bold reassessment of one of the most interesting and influential men of his generation. Okay, there you go. So who is the author when he's at home? He is the New York Times bestselling author of Seward, Lincoln's indispensable man, Stanton, Lincoln's war secretary, and John Jay, founding father. A 2-time winner of the Seward Award for Excellence in Civil War Biography, Starr practiced law in Washington and Asia for more than 2 decades, and now lives with his wife, Masami Starr, in Newport Beach, California. Okay. I'm trying to remember if I have a checkered history with this author, actually, because I wrote a review of a biography of Edmund Stanton, Lincoln's war secretary. This author wrote a book called Stanton, Lincoln's war secretary, and I wrote a review of it that was a hoot. It was a classic example, as one friend put it at the time. This is a classic example of Steve just having fun, and. The author of that, now I'm blanking on who the author, was it this guy? Oh my God, am I going to review another book of his? The author of that book read my review, and I had butterflies in my stomach, to tell you the truth, because I wasn't sure if he was going to get what I was doing. I wasn't sure that, no offense to the author, I just wasn't sure he was going to get it. Authors are so accustomed to reviews that are completely binary, just black or white, that I wasn't sure he would appreciate anything about the piece, but he left a comment. Unfortunately, I'm sure that the comment is long gone. I'm sure that it was lost in the transition of Open Letters Monthly to Open Letters Review. The pieces were largely saved, but the comments I'm sure were gone. But he left a comment on that piece saying that not only was it the best review of his book that he's ever read, but it was the best review of anything that he's ever read. If I remember, I'll leave a link to that review down below. I'm certainly going to be looking for it because I want to know if this is the same author. if this is the same author, I had better play it straight with this book. I better not have a lot of fun. Unless he provokes me, I would argue that he provoked me with the Stanton book. If it's him, it might not be him. So I'll have to check. And if it is, well, either way, whether it's him or not, I'll leave a link to that review down below, because it was, even now I look back on it with a great deal of affection. I loved it. So there you go. That is The Mail, a debut novel and a big new biography of Salmon Chase. The vague outline of 2022's biography landscape. Biography is my favorite kind of writing, so naturally I'm curious about the landscape for 2022. The vague outline is starting to come into shape. There look to be some things on the horizon that I very much want. I don't know if there'll be one after another of them. It's way too early to tell. That part of the publishing world won't really come into focus until the autumn, when publishers seem to think that everybody wants to buckle down with a long biography. There won't be as many of them that will come out in the impending summer. But Salmon Chase will certainly feature heartily on there. I'll hope to see what's what with it. That would be great. But anyway, that is The Mail. Just 2 books and a bunch of periodicals and a whole bunch of ranting. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.